Hey everybody, welcome back to the Convo Couch. Today I'm with Rebecca Parsons. She is running in Washington's 6th District for Congress. Hey Rebecca, thank you for being here.
Hi, thanks so much for having me.
So Rebecca, we've talked before, but when we've spoken, it was before the pandemic, it was before we had all these economic issues, and now we're seeing the movement of Black Lives Matter. So I kind of just wanted to ask you, what is the number one issue right now in your district?
The biggest issue is the economic fallout from COVID and the recession and the government's failure to provide for people. I think there's an eviction wave that's going to come as soon as the eviction moratorium is over. Also, just people who've been out of work, even myself, kind of struggling right now, and all I've gotten is $1,200 one-time check. So that's really a big issue. And then also Social Security is huge because 24% of the district is on Social Security. And the person I'm running against, Congressman Derek Kilmer, just signed onto a letter with Republicans calling for Mitt Romney's plan to cut Social Security. It's just outrageous. So the economic issues, and then also we actually, in Tacoma in March had a case very similar to George Floyd. His name was Manuel Ellis, and he was killed by police, and his last words were, "I can't breathe, sir." As the police officer was killing him. And so that's a big issue in Tacoma right now as well.
And so just going off on that issue of Black Lives Matter and police brutality, we're seeing right now people marching by the thousands, marching in the streets for police brutality. We've also seen the shift towards talking about economic issues also that separate people from different races. Black men and women earn a lot less income than white men and women, and families in general. So what is your opinion on that movement that's happening right now?
I think it's really important. I mean, it's these killings of Black Americans, especially, just for the crime of living, walking down the street, going to the store, walking and listening to headphones. I mean, this has been going on for so long, and it's a continuation of centuries of racism. And just now it's getting a lot more attention, and I'm glad that it is. It's hugely important. And it ties in with, our failure as a country to acknowledge, the sin of slavery, and never really owning up to it and facing it. Years ago, I worked with the International Association of Genocide Scholars, and looking at genocides that happened around the world, the countries that were the most successful in moving forward from that had truth and reconciliation commissions, and they actually faced up to their past and were open and honest about it. We've never done that. We really need to. And then also on the economic side, reparations, like the 40 acres and a mule was just never paid. It's a debt that we as a country owe that we need to pay. And so I really think this time is calling and showing people how much we need reparations.
And particularly also for Black Americans, I went to the protest yesterday at the detainment center in Northwest Tacoma. And I also saw a coming together of a lot of Latinos and people who are against ICE, which is another arm of the establishment. It's another arm of the oligarchy that we have. We're incarcerating people at alarming rates. How do you think we can combine efforts for against police brutality and looking at the economics concerning Black Americans, and also start involving other issues like a general strike movement, like a homes guarantee, which is something you promote, like LGBTQ equality across the board, equality in women, all these things that we want, Medicare for all, which is something we should already have. How do you think we can combine all these movements and these efforts?
Well, one way is looking at, the killings of Black people simply for doing ordinary, everyday things as they're doing nothing wrong. And then that's just a tool, a system of racial control. And when you look at the immigration system, that's also a tool and a system of racial control. Anybody who is brown, who looks Latino, who is Latino, they are at risk for being racially profiled, picked up by ICE. It's a way to keep the system of white supremacy that we have in place. And so I think it's important to recognize, for white people like myself, to recognize what's really going on there. And then there's also, we need to look at the system that we have economically. economically, where our country became very wealthy very quickly and became a world power extremely quickly. How did that happen? Well, we had people who were working for free because they were enslaved. And now we have, what is our system right now? How are people at the top so wealthy and people, the rest of the 99% are not? And we have prison labor. We still have essentially slavery with people in prisons working for little to nothing. And in the Northwest Detention Center that's in Tacoma, people receive $1 a day to work, and they have to buy their essentials for shampoo, soap, stuff like that. Little bottle of shampoo in the NWDC costs $8. So you have to work for over a week to be able to afford to wash your hair. And we have to really think about that. There's disproportionately people of color, Black people, Latinos in various forms of incarceration, whether it's jail, prison, immigration detention centers. We have to look at it all as a whole. What purpose is it serving? People in there working for free. I think, looking at it economically, racially, and then as well, you mentioned LGBTQ issues. People who are trans face violence in prisons, and they're often put in a prison that is not where they should be according to their gender. And so they face violence, bullying, just extreme discrimination when they're in jails and prisons. So I think we should look at how it all works together, and then look for the organizations that are doing the work, like Mi Gente is one, Black Lives Matter, local activists, and I think we're seeing that with Black Lives Matter protests, that people are coming together, and you see people from, at least in Tacoma, a lot of different strands of activism coming together and following local organizers' lead.
And do you support defunding the police and putting that money back into the communities that need it?
I support taking money from the police, reallocating, putting it to social services. There's no reason that the police should have tanks, grenade launchers. They should not be equipped like an invading army. A lot of what police do is not, there are other professionals who are trained for it, mental health, counselors, school teachers, school psychologists. And so I think we should reallocate, take a lot of that funding away, put it towards these social services. And also, we really need to demilitarize the police. A lot of centrist Democrats now are talking the talk and saying that, we need to demilitarize, but look at their record. Like my opponent, Representative Derek Kilmer, in 2014, he voted against demilitarizing the police. So we really need to stop the transfer of military weapons to police.
And just going off of that as well, what has changed in you since you've seen Bernie Sanders's run come to an end? Since you've seen how the establishment treated him and treats progressives in general, they pretty much target progressives more than they target their Republican opponents. So how has that changed your perspective in seeing just how it's so difficult to get anything done for as far as progressive issues?
I was really devastated when Bernie, didn't win the nomination, and it was a really low period for a lot of people on the left, like myself. And what has changed is that like you said, the establishment, the corporate, elements of the Democratic Party will fight hard to maintain their power, and they see us as a threat to their power, and we are. And so we need to look at it that way, is what are, the hard-nosed tactics we're going to use to actually gain power and wield power, and really force progressive things through in Congress. We can't be afraid to have them dislike us. Just by the fact, for example, of me running, there's a certain number of people and elements of the, establishment corporate wing of the Democratic Party who are just going to dislike me for the fact that I'm even running. And so we as progressives need to stick to our principles and not try to appease them, because we're never going to appease them. The only thing that would appease them would becoming a sellout. And so we can't be nice. We can't, maybe if we just say it nicely enough, maybe if we make enough concessions, what they want is to maintain their power. And so we need to keep that in mind and stay true to our values and remember why we're fighting, which is like people like, grandmother in my district who's living on $600 a month in Social Security, and half of it goes to paying for her health care. I mean, there's literally, a senior living on $300 a month. And so, the establishment wing, establishment politicians, the DCCC, they can play all their power games. We have to learn how to play, gain and maintain and wield power as well, but never forget, they have their power games. We have the people we're really fighting for, like a senior living on $300 a month.
So Shama Sawant is a popular politician because she is able to organize in her community and make a really big impact nationally, take on Amazon. But yet I see in Congress a lot of the times you mentioned that they are the Congress people, even the progressives like the squad, are worried about how they're going to be perceived by Nancy Pelosi. But it's not just because they're worried about it. It's because Nancy Pelosi has so much power in what committees she appoints people to, et cetera, what committees people get into. And I think that they're trying to play ball to a degree in order to maintain any sort of power that they could possibly have to get things done. How are you going to deal with that? Because that's always one of my worries when we're sending people into Congress. As progressive as they are, it's difficult for them to navigate when there's not that many of them and they don't have that much power. How will you go about it differently?
One way I think is working with outside movements to get what we want in Congress. So the squad, I think each of them got into one of the three most prestigious, I think, financial services, appropriations, stuff like that. And it's very unusual. And it's because at the time when they got in, there was a lot of outside pressure on Nancy Pelosi and on the Democratic leadership to put them in these committees. And I remember how much I'd call them, say we want them in there. I mean, so much outside pressure to get them in. And so I think it's really effective when, members of Congress work with the outside movements to get what they want. And I think also progressives need to band together and be willing to form, maybe a caucus, something like that, where, we have our objectives, we have what's best for our districts, and we're going to look at the situation and work together in unison and deploy the tactics and strategies we think are most effective for getting our goals. And so really being willing to take criticism from the center wing and work together, because I think when, the Freedom Caucus started with less than 10 people, and they were a big part in remaking the Republican Party. And there was only less than 10 of them at the beginning. So when you have small numbers, but you work together in lockstep and really move strategically, I think that you can get a lot done.
Right now we're looking at Russia and again, we've spent the last few years focused on Russia and them interfering in our elections, et cetera, et cetera. Now we're sanctioning Russia again, and we are attempting to bring that back. What is your current feeling on how you would deal with foreign policy? Because what it seems like to me is we're starting a new Cold War with China as well. What do we do? Because I feel like a lot of our candidates that get in there kind of put foreign policy on the back burner, and that takes away a lot of our taxpayer dollars that don't end up being used domestically.
Yeah, I mean, this Russia stuff, it's a way for us to avoid looking at, yes, there are Russian troll farms, yes, there's that kind of stuff, but why so much focus on that? And I think partly to avoid looking at our own problems. Talking about stoking divisions and, one or two times that Russian trolls created a Black Lives Matter protest 4 years ago on Facebook and people showed up. Okay, maybe that happened. But we do actually have police brutality against Black Americans and people literally dying. And so all this focus on, this Russiagate and Putin and they're hacking us and all this stuff, creating troll farms and putting up memes on Facebook is not hacking the election. That's not hacking Facebook. It's just using Facebook. And so we need to have people in Congress who understand how these things work. What actually is hacking? What do you even mean by that? And then how are we going to actually look at the real issues that are going on and keep bringing attention back to those? So for me, foreign policy is really important. I grew up overseas because my dad was a foreign service officer. And my experience going with, that genocide studies work, I went to Guatemala to learn Spanish. They went through a 30-year civil war because we helped topple their government, their democratically elected government. And then they went into 30 years of civil war, during which there was a genocide of the Mayan people in Guatemala. I went there, I learned Spanish there, I met people, survivors of this. It just ended in the 90s. And then I volunteered as a human rights observer for the Zapatistas, who are also made up of Mayan tribes just across the border in Mexico. And I saw saw what happens when people have self-determination and they decide how they live their own lives, and they have political and economic democracy as well. And democracy is extremely important to me. Having a say in your workplace, what happens with the results of your labor. And so for me, foreign policy is really important because we have an outsized influence in the world. Our actions, just putting sanctions on Iran, for example, made coronavirus much worse there because regular people couldn't get supplies. And we need to think about, put more attention on our actions, drastically reduce the amount of money that we're spending on overseas wars, and put it into social programs and improving our own situation here, and just stop this constant, endless hypocritical wars where we're claiming to bring democracy, we're going to export democracy. No, what we're doing is exporting McDonald's to these countries and spending money on invading them instead of on people here who need our help.
100%. And just to start wrapping it up, elections our last few elections have been absolutely horrible. I mean, we have seen Democrats and Republicans both push voter suppression and election fraud, meaning the machines haven't been working properly, the votes have gone missing or appeared in bins. Throughout Bernie Sanders' presidential run, we saw it, but also with progressives running in congressional and local races. How do we combat election integrity? Because election integrity is one of the issues people dismiss, but also it's also one of the reasons why many people just don't vote, because they're apathetic and they think my vote doesn't count.
Yeah. Well, we saw that with, Nabila Islam's results in Georgia took a long time to come out because of the lines there. And Charles Booker was impacted by that whole county only having, I think, one polling place. And it's just ridiculous. And the Republicans, it's kind of like the Republicans are just going to do what they do. We know what they're going to do, that they're going to suppress the vote, especially of black voters and voters of color and low income voters. That's just what they do. And so we need to stop wringing our hands and actually do something about it. Restore the full power of the Voting Rights Act and institute, like here in Washington State, we have a pretty good voting system. You don't have to register with a party to vote. There is no party registration. It's all mail-in voting. You get it, the ballot is sent to your house automatically and you send it back. You don't even have to pay postage. You can register on the same day you vote. We should get stuff like that across the country because people, we saw these lines of people waiting 5-6 hours and more in other places around the country. And people who work like at a Starbucks or a McDonald's or at the auto shop, like they don't have that time. That time they're standing in line is time they're not getting their hourly wage. So we need to, paper ballots are secure. Mail-in balloting is secure. We need to, I think, have national legislation to regularize this across the country.
And anything else that you'd like the viewers to know? Anything that they should take on direct action right now?
Yeah, I think if you're looking for something to do right now, look for your local Black Lives Matter organizers, follow their lead on what they're doing for tenants' rights organizing, because I do think we have a massive eviction wave coming. Look for your local tenants union and your local DSA chapter if you have one nearby, because they're doing a lot of work on tenants' rights organizing and protecting people and trying to keep people out of homelessness. So those would be my 2 suggestions if you're looking for something to do right now in your community.
And where can people find and donate?
I don't take any corporate PAC or lobbyist money, and so if you can give, some people think, I can only give $1. Does that even help? It absolutely helps. It funds 18 calls to voters. We've already made over 400,000 calls to voters. We need to make a lot more because, of course, we're not canvassing. So if you can donate, please go to rebecca4wa.com to do that. Donate $1 if you can. If you can't, go ahead and just click on the link to volunteer, and we have stuff going on every day.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.